So, in what'll be the most detailed breakdown you ever see on the internet, we're gonna get to Georgia versus Ole Miss this week. Georgia's favored by 7 points, big spread. We're gonna talk about things, cover if they can get it. You see, 46% of the money is on Georgia, 25% of the bets. So let's get on into it, and we're gonna start breaking down matchup by matchup. And the first matchup we gotta look at is Georgia passing game versus the Ole Miss defense. You see Gunner Stockton; he's been kept clean on 71.7% of his dropbacks this year, 82.2 PFF grade, 4 touchdowns, 1 picks. He's been under pressure 28.3% of the time, 2 touchdowns, no picks. I watched him in about 3 games this year, and I haven't really been impressed with any of the games I've seen. I think he's just a average, maybe game manager. He has a little bit of speed to him, so he's more than capable of getting out of the pocket and causing a little bit of havoc. But the Tennessee game was about the highlight of his passing: 304 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. Against Alabama, he threw for 130 yards. Against Kentucky, rebounded through for 245, 1 touchdown. Did have 2 picks in the game. Against Auburn, 217. So I would say for a normal passing range for him, you expect to get around 200, 225 yards. And then let's look at Georgia's offensive line versus the Ole Miss. Let's look at the battle of the trenches here. And Georgia's offensive line, they're great out, really good in pass blocking. See Drew Bobo, 83.8 grade. Monroe Fleeting, 80.8. Michael Moore, 74.2. A lot of good grades across there. Now, the run blocking is where Georgia has a little bit of the issue. Some of them kind of grade out just average, 58.9, 59.2. When it comes to PFF, around a 60 grade is kind of replacement play. If you ever know what baseball war is, when they talk about replacement level player, that's about the equivalent of a 60 grade. So I won't say they're super great on that side of the ball. But Ole Miss's D line, they really haven't generated a pass rush like they have. Last year their front four was really good, but this year it's not been the case. Their highest grade is Human with I probably messed that name, but he has a 70.3 grade, and only wins 12.1% win rate, 17 total pressures. But you see the rest of the defense on the line, they just don't win off the ball. You got Suntaran Perkins with a 12.5 win rate, and then Cam Franklin, their other top pressure rate pass rusher, 9.2% win rate. So seeing that defensive line going against Georgia's offensive line, I will say that's not a great matchup for Ole Miss here. So I got to give the battle of the trenches on this side of the ball to Georgia. And let's look at Ole Miss's pass D, and you can see they've been Arkansas kind of gashed them. That's been a game that stood out for them. I remember watching that game, and nobody just wanted to play defense that night. And then against all the other games, they actually had a really solid pass defense. 218 yards to Washington State was not ideal, but still wasn't like Washington State just went off. And LSU only got 197, Kentucky 187. So I think that I don't think Georgia's can it really exploit the matchup like that. I think Ole Miss, at least would hold them to 200, 250 yards passing. If I had to, make a guess there, Ole Miss does run on 80% zone coverage, and Ole Miss does grade out kind of decent at zone coverage. And can Georgia run the ball in Ole Miss? I think the second part of the matchup, and Georgia runs the ball. They're 29th in run play percentage at 56.94. So Georgia wants to run the football, and they're kind of decent at it. 49th in EPA per play, 42nd in success rate. Uh, they've averaged almost around 200 yards, except Auburn. They only ran for 79 yards. But remember, if you watched the preview for that, we talked about Auburn being a really good run defense. And that is something Ole Miss is not. They're 122nd EPA per play, 117th in success rate. And you can see Arkansas gas from 221, Georgia State from 191, Kentucky got her from 172. Even Tulane ran on her from 178. But this is not a very good run defense. So obviously this side of the ball I think has to be a massive favorite for Georgia. And remember, Georgia's the home team for this game. So if they can just keep running the ball down Ole Miss's throat, that cannot be a good matchup for them. So now we're going to look at the edge for when Georgia has the ball. And like I already talked about, when Georgia's passing the ball, I got to give the edge to Ole Miss. Neither side has proven to be elite, but Ole Miss does great out good on PFF in the passing game. So I got to give the edge there. When Georgia's offensive line versus Ole Miss defensive line, Georgia does have the edge in pass blocking, and Ole Miss has major issues stopping the run. So to me, the edge has to go to Georgia there. And then Georgia's run game, Georgia has a high run rate, which can make Ole Miss vulnerable given their run struggles. So to me, the massive edge has to go to Georgia there. And trying to guess Georgia's total yardage. And at the end of this video, you see why I'm doing this. I will assume around 200 passing yards, 150, 200 yards on the ground. So let's say 350 to 400 yards of offense for Georgia. And now let's look at Ole Miss's passing attack, which is we're going to get the other side of the football. And Ole Miss doesn't really pass the ball that much, not as much as you would think. Only 110th in the country, 42% pass rate. They're kind of decent at it, though. 23rd in EPA per play, 16th in success rate. So when they do pass the ball, they're going to gash you for chunks down the field. And they've thrown 11 touchdowns, 5 picks. With Trinidad Chambliss, that quarterback, was into a second. I think their passing game has got a little bit better. And you can see they thrown for 357 on Arkansas, 307 on Tulane, threw for 400 on Georgia State, 253 on Washington State. The totals were kind of down for that game, but I think that was a look ahead spot of this game. So I'm willing to excuse some of the stats just a little bit. Now look at Trinidad Chambliss. Came over from Ferris State, 77.8 when he's kept clean, 81.8 PFF grade, and under pressure 22.2%. And also grades out going under pressure 81.5, one touchdown, no pick. It doesn't really put the ball in harm's way, which is good. 60% completion. And now we look at the battle of the trench there. Ole Miss's offensive line versus Georgia's defensive line. You can see this where Ole Miss kind of lacks a little bit. Their run blocking grades have been horrible. 55.9, 63.8. A lot of below average and maybe average in the run blocking. And then for the pass blocking, 57.8. Jaden Williams, their tackle, is 71 grade PFF. So they're not good in the trenches on that. They're more. And Georgia's pass rush, they don't really grade out elite either. Chris Cole, 12.5% win rate, and Raylan Wilson, 10% win rate. But definitely not a matchup I would say that screams Georgia. I'd say at best it's probably a neutral matchup here. And now we at Georgia's passing defense stats. And they're 59th in opponent completion percentage, 125th in sack rate. They don't really get to the quarterback. 71st in opponent passing yards per game. And you can see that Tennessee gashed them for 371. Kentucky went for over 200 on them. Auburn don't really have a pass attack, so you got to really, kind of excuse that game. But I do think this is a matchup that could potentially favor Ole Miss a little bit. I could see them, going for at least about 250 yards on Georgia. And now we look at Ole Miss rushing attack versus Georgia. And Ole Miss rushing attack, 42nd EPA per play, 37th success rate. They do like to run the ball a lot, 57% of, or yeah, 57% of the time for 27th in the country. 16th in rushes per game, 19th in rushing yards per game. And you can see that Ole Miss rushing attack, they kind of took advantage, I think, some weaker competition. 221 on Arkansas's defense, 191 on Georgia State, 178 on Tulane. When they did play LSU, they got held to 57 yards. And Georgia also kind of rates out their run defense is really good, and we'll get to in a second. And you can see their PFF grades across the board for Georgia. They're just look at all the 80s. You got CJ Allen, 91.7. Just real elite there and stopping the run. And then Georgia's run D stats, 8th in the country in EPA per play, 37th in success rate. And they're really stifling at the run. Even at Auburn, 36 carries for 140 yards. That's been the highest total ran on them this year. So on this side of the football, I do think Ole Miss may struggle to run the football. And given that that's kind of how Ole Miss wants to move the chains, I can see them being put in a lot of uncomfortable situations. So now I'm getting when Ole Miss has the ball edge. And Ole Miss passing attack versus Georgia. Georgia's been vulnerable through the air, and Ole Miss, I do think, has the ability to take advantage. So I got to give the edge to Ole Miss. Ole Miss offensive line versus Georgia defensive line. Georgia's been really great versus the run, and Ole Miss rates poorly on PFF blocking grades. So I think on the passing side, you get a neutral matchup in the trenches, but on the run game, I think it massively favors Georgia. So I got to go the edge to Georgia there. And Ole Miss rushing attack versus Georgia. Ole Miss may struggle to run the ball on Georgia, given what I just laid out for you. So I think the edge has to go to Georgia. And Ole Miss's total yard prediction. This is kind of tough to do, but I think that they could pass for 200, 250 yards through the air. And on the ground, I think, is where it could be a different story. I went 125 is kind of like a max what I think they could get, but I definitely see them being held to, probably under 100 yards on the ground. So I'd say, probably around, I've got between 275 to 375 yards, but I would say they're more likely to get held to probably about 300 to 325. And now we got yards per point. And this is what I was talking about for the end of the video. And it kind of looks at how the efficiency of yards, kind of something you get in like sports book, how you come up with lines and everything. And I think on the offense side of the ball, between 14 and 15 is a good number to use. They average 14 yards per point for Kentucky against LSU, 15.83. I'm not going to really put Georgia State. They get 9.10, but that's a weak football team. Against Washington State, 17.5. I call that a look ahead spot. So just given what I see, I think, between 14 and 15 was just a good number to try to go with the use. And on the defense side of the ball, ironically, ended up coming the same number. Yards per point allowed 15.61 for Kentucky, 15.03 for Arkansas, 13.37 for LSU. So, given all that, I think between 14 and 15 is a good start point number. Now, look at Georgia yards per point side, and their offense yards per point, it's kind of went all over the place. Tennessee was their best one, 11.4. Other than Marshall, which I'm not really going to count for this. And but the problem is, I don't think they're going to replicate that Tennessee type effort. That was some of that, like in the passing, and definitely kind of came out of nowhere. So, but against Kentucky, they got a 12.1 with Alabama. Their offense yards per play went back up to 17, at Auburn 14.6. And you also remember the Alabama game. Georgia had a touchdown, a wide open post over the middle that receiver dropped, and they left some points off the board. So I'm willing to bet that between 12 and 15 is going to be the points that, somewhere to kind of look at for a good number. And it's tough to assume a number for the defense side of the ball, but Georgia's been a real stingy on that ball. He had 12.1 yards per point for Tennessee, 16.5 at Alabama, 19.3 at Kentucky. But I went with 16. I kind of excused the Tennessee game. That kind of looks like a little bit of a outlier here. And I don't think Ole Miss can take advantage in areas like Tennessee could, given that matchup. So now we got to look at if Georgia can cover. And at 375 yards of offense for Georgia, I got them between 25 and 31 points. 340 yards of offense for Ole Miss, between 22 and 24 points. And at 400 yards of offense, got Georgia capping out at 33 points. Ole Miss 375 yards of offense, would be the perfect scenario. I got them capping out and getting 27 points. I do think there's a decent chance Georgia can cover in this. And remember when I talked about Ole Miss, I was being kind of generous when I went up to the 340. I could definitely see them getting held to, 325 in the 300 range. And if that happens, Georgia should be able to cover fairly easily here. But if Georgia struggles a little bit, Ole Miss can, hang around the football game. There's a chance to cover. But I think given betting perspective, it's all 50-50 anyways. They don't put these numbers out of thin air. There's a reason why. And I kind of, if you see where the sportsbooks numbers and what I came up, so you can kind of see how the number came up. So, but I do think Georgia's got a great chance to cover that number. And if you're playing the total points, it's between 47 and 60. The over under is at 54.5. If you buy it out to, buy points with it, maybe parlay it with something else, can get the number, 60. Of course, like a minus 300 payout or something, but parlay that with something else and you might be able to get an easy double your money. I don't see both teams combining over the 60. That would take a elite effort from Ole Miss and pretty much elite effort from Georgia. So I think there's a higher chance that goes, to the under than it does, the over. But I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I hope this breakdown helps y'all for the football game. Thank y'all for watching.